Welcome to Series 2 of the ESG podcast. This series will focus on those who are in the throes of the everyday, the CEOs, founders and investors who are looking at the future and how best to navigate the new and changing landscape of business and its impact on all stakeholders. Today's guests are Zandra Moore and Alex Craven. We are definitely blessed with both of them today. Zandra is passionate about enabling women in the tech industry, improving gender equality and increasing investment in the business, founded by fellow female entrepreneurs. And her earlier roles in tech instilled an appreciation of technology industry and a desire to make the change in mostly male-led sectors. Zandra is committed and dedicated to the UK technology sector and has led numerous awards and industry recognition, mostly recently the Emerging Entrepreneur Award and the Enterprise Awards 2023, Outstanding Entrepreneur Award from the Northern Power of Women 2023, and also her Panintelligence software won the BI Solution of the Year at the British Data Awards 2023. Zandra can be found on LinkedIn by searching for Zandra Moore and at Panintelligence. Alex is also with us, and he is a co-founder and the CEO of Data City, where their mission is to map the UK's emerging economy and providing researchers, policymakers, and investors with real-time data on dynamic sectors and companies within them. Zandra and Alex, welcome to the Gonna Cook ESG podcast.
Great to be here, thank you.
Lovely to see you, Rashmi.
Maybe we can just start off by saying, maybe with you, Zandra, if that's possible, given your experience and the breadth of knowledge that you have, you both see the risk and the continuing risk, but to me, there is also the unconscious bias in terms of how we approach things, particularly if we don't have the right data. And I'm thinking of in today's world where there is a very large race to become winners in the artificial intelligence world. And they're building on data that they may already have, which isn't always correct. We've seen incidences with Google, for instance, when they were using AI to create images of history. I mean, what's your take on how we can best maybe mitigate risk?
Thanks, Rashmi. It's interesting, isn't it, observing the acceleration of AI and just how top-down boards are sort of scrambling to work out whether they're going to be missing an opportunity to leverage competitive advantage or, drive some operational efficiencies and trying to work out what the best technology is and the best application of that. We hear it everywhere. It's a real, it's both an opportunity, but it's also a risk. And yeah. I think one of the most embedded risks in this is twofold, really. We have the fact that most organisations are sat on quite large data sets and yet still don't really know what they've got, and that those data sets aren't really being talked about in a way that can leverage the value or understand the risks of that really at a board level. And I think for AI to be effective in driving real value for organisations, it needs to be based on the data that they have and that they control, as opposed to just open data sets, because that's where they'll have those opportunities. And often we find that bias is ultimately built into those data sets. And if you don't have a governing organisation or board that is also diverse, looking at a data set and challenging whether that bias is actually built in inherently to that data, then we've got a systemic problem that we're going to build technology on top of data sets that actually builds bias into everything that we start to operationalize. So that's a real challenge. But I think a lot of what I'm hearing around AI is it's simply about opportunity or operational efficiencies. There's not actually enough talked about risk. I think people perceive AI could have risk factors, but we often hear that about regulation, right? I think there's just better conversations to have had at board levels. If we're going to use data to drive change and drive value, do we really understand that data and what it's built upon? But ultimately, if we're going to think about, systemic change and when we're going to come on to talk about ESG, and I know that's the focus of this podcast, and Alex maybe talk some good practice on that, then we think about ESG in particular. nobody's really looking at ESG data fundamentally. When I hear people talking about data, they're thinking about, like I say, that from an opportunity or operational. But are people really talking about ESG from a data point of view? Not enough. And there is a huge opportunity there to drive real change and drive real value and mitigate risk at the same time. And I think, Alex's data set is a really, really important part of that value creation, I think, for boards. And we can talk about some practical applications of what we've done, but I'm going to shut up now and let Alex do some
No, but what I find fascinating about what you said, though, is you're right, because if you're sitting on a piece of data and you already have that knowledge, right? But you have to look at that knowledge and nobody probably asks the question, how does that data impact my stakeholders? And if I can look at it from a different perspective, even a 1% change of how we do things from an operational perspective can impact the risk and can reduce the amount of bias that we have on the board, right? Because you already have that information. And the good governance practice from the ESG perspective is, can we review this data? Can we bring in people to help us make sure that we are looking at the right data as well and what we've got? And how do we move forward collecting new data?
Yeah,
Alex,
absolutely that.
You mean you're the expert here? I'm just the person that comes in and helps boards with the governance and point them in the right direction. Then I bring you guys in.
Yeah. So the point that we've been getting increasingly involved in is this shift into flows of capital through asset classes driven by us all ticking ESG focused options on our pension funds. So obviously data is a very broad topic, and there's data in all organizations, and there's risk and bias opportunities and pitfalls across all of that. But specifically in relation to the topic of this podcast and the work we're doing is that how do you use data to not only understand how much of the capital you're responsible for deploying needs to be particularly minded of the ESG obligations you've opted to accept when you offered an ESG focused option to your pension fund? Does that flow through into lending in our large financial institutions, high street banks properly? Does it flow through the GPLP community into venture capital and private equity investments in small, medium, large businesses on that side of things, or hedge funds into the buying and sale of publicly traded stocks? And there's a role for data across all of that value chain into every organization. So the sort of stuff we've been asked to do is and it's amazing that no one's really done this, but simply provide data on the gender dynamics of the boards of the companies that are receiving investment, which is a big piece of work we've been doing with Zandra and the Lifted project. We've helped Lloyds deploy a £1 billion ESG focused debt fund. So these are serious amounts of money. And in order to do that, what they've got to do is understand the business base and the point of view of whether the companies they're targeting are aligned to the values of that fund. And they had to also do some really interesting stuff like get regulatory approval to create a discriminatory lending algorithm which favours companies that meet the ESG focus of the fund, because historically it's all got to be treated equally, but actually this is a fund that deliberately discriminates for ESG focused, regional, women-led, and they've got a few other criteria businesses. So obviously what you don't want to do if you're Lloyds is go and speak to a load of companies that don't meet those criteria, because it's a waste of everybody's time, but will cause friction. You do want to be able to target the right sorts of companies. So yeah, understanding gender dynamics of boards, it would be great to get social mobility, ethnicity, and other excludes minority group data in there, but it's quite hard to obtain.
That's actually really interesting from the listener's perspective, and anybody who's sitting on a board who is trying to practice the G, because my favorite saying is it's not ESG, it's GSE, because the governance will then follow through the social and the environment. But you're right to say, what is the core value of what we want to invest in? Okay. And if that core value aligns, then that's great. But that's what the fundamental principle is of governance of boards is, what is the company's purpose? What are our core values? And we follow through. We are going to then attract the right investors, the right stakeholders, the right supply chain. And actually, data is a key ingredient in that, in understanding that, because we don't know what we don't know unless we think it's just based on what we believe, and that is fundamentally wrong, right? It's when in previous years, let's use a simple example, people are networking, and let's take the construction industry as an example. You're hardly ever going to see a woman in that, right? And so when you do, it disrupts the rhythm of everything. But actually, why aren't we encouraging that a little bit more and making it the norm?
Do you think there's perhaps a bit, we've sort of shifted from greenwashing into governance washing now? There's a lot of
I like that.
Well said, Alex.
We
Yeah,
coined that
I
phrase
agree
here.
with that.
Because what we're
Top-
seeing,
top
because obviously we do a lot of web scraping, so what we've started doing is scraping ESG statements, and they are sort of reading through them. They're very values-based statements, but some of the ones I've read, I know the way that the business operates in some cases personally, and it's all just words, right? It's the Enron, it's exactly the the very famous Enron values was integrity, honesty, on their walls, and the opposite of how they were living their values. And in our previous discussions, the bit that really got me excited about doing this podcast was your sort of point about what does this mean if you're a hedge fund and you've encouraged the allocation of ESG focused pension fund investments into publicly traded stocks of companies who are governance washing, and then behaving in a way which is totally contrary to the the options we all selected? And what does that mean for the fiduciary responsibilities of the board, the governance responsibilities, the corporate responsibilities? That's quite a fascinating space, that, I think. Yeah.
It deserves a whole podcast to itself, doesn't it, really?
Yeah. But it starts with data, doesn't it? You've got to size it and then publish it and then ask what it means, right? And then it's for the lawyers to go and work that out.
This is my whole point, is which is the ESG litigation, is it's already fundamentally started. We've already seen a court case that a competitor's taken another company to court over greenwashing on their website because they knew, and they won. Yeah. So it's not just watch out for who you think is your immediate concern of risk of who might catch you out, but actually it's everybody who's going to be impacted by it. And I think mapping of, I know I'm going off the tangent a bit, but mapping stakeholders is really, really critical. I've just done an article on the use of the name of Pablo Escobar, and the European court said it was in the public interest not to use that name when this company wanted to do it, and they were in the crypto arena, and it's because it would impact the Spanish people because of the nature of it's too close to the situation. But if the company had considered their stakeholder and all the stakeholders, they should have realized it. But it was his brother who did it, so I don't think he was going to pay attention to stakeholders. But you never know, he may have done. I don't want to be held liable. Yeah. I don't. I'm not saying anything, but it's an interesting case, which then sort of kind of makes me ask the question about really, do you think data, and this is a question for both of you, do you think data plays a key role in understanding how we, maybe as leaders on boards, how that affects our biases, our behavior, and by collating that data and viewing it, do you think it really helps the company's strategy and its purpose and moving it forward?
100%.
I think, 100%. You said something. So many decisions are still made on gut instincts or ideas of what's happening, as opposed to really understanding detail. I mean, I can't tell you how many very large, sizable, unnamed organisations are still being run off spreadsheets, right? And people still put a skew of a lens on that and will apply filters or exclude and include data based on whatever story they're telling. And, there's a real need for data to be quite raw sometimes. And that the layer of that visibility over that data to be something that anybody can explore to be able to come to their own conclusions based on their frame of reference, the position that they come from. And that's why it's so important that you have diverse people around a table looking at information that hasn't been filtered, that is as raw as it can be. And where sort of the business that I operate comes in is that we try and make that, it's that domain expert led ability to review information and explore that data in their own way, without needing to be a data scientist, without needing to be a business intelligence person, or having to be an Excel wizard. They can literally look at the raw data sets that they've got and actually ask themselves if that's good enough, and whether the data's right, whether there's any inherent biases, but also come to their own conclusions and find insights that frankly are probably hidden from them around the board table. So it's just making everybody a data leader, really, enabling everybody to become better informed so that they are making decisions based on information, but information they've actually been able to glean themselves as opposed to being fed. And I do think there's a real danger at the kind of board level, at that governance level, that they go and tell somebody, I want this information, and that person then translates that and then presents that back to maybe not always tell all of the truth, because people are hiding maybe issues with data or issues with other aspects of the organisation. So we've got to make everybody really data experts, data literate, data
experts. I love that, by the way. Data enabled and data experts is brilliant. And you're right, to have all the information. You reminded me of something that happened during lockdown, which really annoyed me, was a lot of the larger firms who larger organisations have to at least provide some sort of data on their gender diversity.
Yeah, gender pay gap and gender diversity data was all relaxed during COVID.
Completely.
And the companies that refused to do it, or didn't refuse, but had said, we're dealing with a lot of things, we're unable to do with this. Well, that you've just told me your core value as a stakeholder. You've told me your core value is that you don't care about women.
Yeah.
100%.
No one who was proud of their performance on that stopped reporting.
Stopped.
Right?
No.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
100%.
But go on.
No. It's been really interesting. Starting to take the lid off regional disparity around the gender lens on investment. When I think about those people that shy away from those conversations and those that don't, the organisations that are not afraid to be at the table and have them is because they don't have a problem as much as others. And I do think there is something about that. People tend to know instinctively they've got a problem, but they might not have all of the data and all of the facts sometimes, so they will shy away from it. But actually, if you did understand the detail and you were able to understand how you could change it and talk about it, then I sometimes think people are too far away from the detail. They know they have a problem, but they don't know how to actually say, we've got this problem and this is how far we need to go. I think
that's quite right as well, because sometimes people just don't understand data. They don't understand how to interpret it. But then I would say it's like finance. When people sit on the boards, it's the same thing. There's a lot of directors just who don't understand the finance and will just accept what's being said, but don't ask enough questions. But all you have to do is get the raw data, like you've said, look at it and make your own interpretation and ask questions. And if you need assistance, get somebody to help you who understands data to answer those questions, and then maybe explain a few other things that you might not have been able to see. Because the person who understands data will also see things that somebody who doesn't understand data can't see.
Absolutely. And those that are operationally, some people are too close to the operational information to be able to understand the strategic impact of a decision they're making. And other people are much more in tune with the impact of a decision and actually need to be able to kind of steer the organisation. Sometimes, a lot of operational people may have more access to the raw data and make more informed decisions, possibly on a day-to-day basis, but aren't aware of maybe the longer term impact of those decisions. And therefore, the people at top are just getting a filtered version of that. It does come back to me. The G and the governance is, unless you do have people at the top table that can see it for themselves and make their own decisions, and they're diverse, you'll never really. It's just people have a lot of pride and a lot of ego, right? Like, well, I'm just going to take the information as read, because I don't know how to challenge that any deeper. I don't know the layers of information that sit behind what I've been presented to be able to understand whether there's something here that I can challenge. I don't understand it.
I mean, my understanding of my fiduciary duties is that I am legally obligated to be able to understand data, certainly financial data, about my organisation or any company I've advised, to the point where I'm not allowed to say I don't understand it, or else I shouldn't be allowed to hold the office of director.
Correct.
And and there's and I think that applies here, right? It's actually you've got to question whether you are providing governance if you are not data literate. If you are being provided data and expected to make decisions on it, and you do not feel like you understand the data or are able to make decisions on it, you should recuse yourself and resign. That's not governance. That's just, it's denim, isn't it? It's without data. It's just an opinion, and opinions are not governance.
No, I absolutely agree wholeheartedly. I couldn't have said that better myself, Alex. I have a question for you, Alex, and something you just said earlier, just before this. You were giving us examples of how the investments and their values have changed. Are you finding, as a result of people offering, companies or organizations with good ESG practices, that they are wanting to attract that investment, that they are relooking at themselves and trying to change how they operate and how they hold their values and build a new culture in their organizations?
There is definitely some evidence of some funds genuinely embracing an ESG focused investing philosophy, and data makes it easier for them to find the companies that are looking for ESG focused investors. So you're hoping that you're getting this sort of values aligned relationship, but I fear that there is more funds doing ESG for the sake of it, and governance washing statements for the sake of it, so that they can look like they are value aligned to their investments, and then are behaving badly. And I would, I do worry sometimes that there's some quite cynical stuff going on out there. It's been raised at sessions I've been in about perhaps the risk of highlighting the plight of female founders smells to some like business people who are unsupported without networks who they can take advantage of. So I think that this is where the risk perhaps goes full circle. I think there are some sharks out there who are now deliberately targeting female founders from the point of view of probably taking advantage of them. Because it's a shark tank, it's a shark tank for male founders, let alone with networks and previous business lives, let alone first-time female founders with no networks and all these other things that we've discussed as being part of the systemic problem. And that's but again, data is part of the answer there. It's it's not just data on the funds flow. It's about connecting female founders, and socially excluded, right? If you're from a council estate, this is a whole new world to you. It'd be very easy to lose your shirt. So it's also about using data to connect these people to the ecosystems of support that actually will actually help these people be successful and stop them being taken advantage of. And then I'd love to see data used to actually measure and report on the actual application of the ESG values that these investors purport to display.
I'd love to do that as well.
Yeah. How many female founders did they back? How many female founders did they back all the way through to a successful exit?
Not just a tick box like, oh, I gave like 1% in, and then they claim that they've done it, but they haven't actually offered any real support, not just financially, but there's other support that they can give. The reason you're investing is you're supposed to open your network up. You're supposed to mentor them in some way. You're
supposed to make them successful, see them all the way through to a successful exit. Like that's the true measure. How many female founders did you invest in, and how many of them did you successfully exit, where they were the prime beneficiary of that process? That's the key measure if you're going to do female. If you're going to invest in women, it's not about exploiting women. It's about investing in women to build successful businesses and exit successfully. Otherwise, it's just
It's interesting because I was I was at the launch, wasn't I, with you, Zandra and Alex, of the task force that you sat on, about high growth female investments. And what's interesting was I was at another talk this week. They were all female. It was in the drinks industry. And it was still a lack of knowledge or the belief that the investment has increased on high growth companies. They genuinely believed that this was now almost equal. And because
it's astonishing.
It's because that's what they're being told. Yeah. And I actually had to raise my hand and said, just to let you know, not necessarily the case. And they were very, very surprised.
Confirmation bias is powerful, right? There's this idea that you see your LinkedIn feed or news articles about those still rare female founders raising investment, those very rare female founders that are exiting businesses successfully, and therefore the problem's solved, right? And it is actually the role of data to keep, and there's people that care about this agenda, to raise the truth repeatedly alongside the narrative of success, because the narrative of success is not actually a reflection of what's really happening. And those success stories get amplified because it's like, hey, we've got one, look at us, aren't we brilliant?
Yes.
You know, governance washing, and gets more attention because it is unusual, but it isn't necessarily the reality. And we know that. And, you know, the task force had its role in elevating the problem, and the data that was in that report really does highlight that. And it's systemic in the investment community, with the lack of diversity in those investment decisions, with IC boards still being predominantly white men from a privately educated backgrounds, frankly, or the Gilet Brigade. And, you know, that's the truth of the part of the problem, but it's not the entire problem. As Alex has said, it's, you know, women aren't as well networked. They don't have access to the same kind of family and friends, seed stage, early stage capital for high net worths as often male founders do. And they usually are not surrounded by peers that are running companies, growing companies, have exited companies, or entrepreneurs. So they don't have that network to go, what was this like for you? Would you do differently? So they are easier to frankly take advantage of in that regard, and you do need to help them build their networks earlier, educate them and support them. And that's true in every, I would say, city, but mostly in the regions where actually we have a much smaller community of entrepreneurs, full stop, and therefore by quantum a much smaller proportion of female founders and entrepreneurs. And the Lifted project, which was the spin out sort of recommendation from the task force, was really focused on using data to empower those cities with, let's go and find those female founders. Let's bring them together so we can create a supportive network and community. Let's educate them and support them so that they are better served to understand what they're walking into and whether these are the right decisions for them. You know, bootstrap, raise money, what type of money, from whom, what should it look like, what good terms, how do I pitch well, how do I secure, how do I understand value? I could go on, right? And let's get them better prepared and with the right support network to lean into those conversations, get a better outcome for themselves, frankly. And then you bring the investors in and then you bring the right people into a room, having given them that support and network to lean back on so that they can get better outcomes. And we're only going to attract investors into those regions, into those cities, if they see a critical mass, frankly, of female founders that support their investment thesis. Because personally speaking, when I was raising my Series A, I only had a group of generalist private equity houses to go and speak to. None of them really understood SaaS. None of them understood technology. And it was difficult, therefore, to find what kind of specialised investment that completely understood my business and was able to give me the support that, frankly, was needed at the stage of growth we were at. And we've got to attract good capital and good support and good advice for female founders. And we do that by showing there's enough of us here to do that for. So I think that's part of what we're doing. But data is the key to that. Data is the key to that. It's ultimately how do we find the women? We use the Data City platform to find the women. And how do we show the impact of what we do over time and demonstrate the value of this investment and show the investment into those female founders and the growth and scale that their businesses and the number of jobs they create and so on, number of employees. We can track all of that over time. we've given them the support, they've driven this investment, this has driven this value and this return. And I think, Alex, your system's now got, you call it births and deaths, like startups, and that we'll be able to track them right the way through to exit, essentially, and see what that level of support provides. So, I think you can use data to really drive systemic positive change by giving people the tools to see and find people and monitor that. Anyway, I'm on my soapbox. I'm going to shut up again.
No. It's fascinating, because the thing I was thinking while you were saying all of this, while I agree with you, is I so wish, I mean, you and I started at very similar times in Leeds in Yorkshire, and I so needed this on my other businesses that I had. I had nobody at that time really to turn to. There was no assistance. And then what happens is, when you don't have those networks around you, you get inwardly thrown in, and then it becomes hard to ask for help later, and you still scramble around, because it's built behavior now. You're too embarrassed, or you've been shut down because you didn't ask the right questions when you were raising funds, or and then you just go, well, I'll just do it myself, I'll do this here, and it becomes very, very difficult. So I would say to anybody out there who's listening to this podcast, if in doubt, get in touch with Zandra and Alex to see how, in whatever region you are, to see how they can help.
Yeah, well, I would, because I think those of us who run companies, I've been running my own company since I was 23, are I would say quite passionate about helping people who've never raised money before get it right. I raised some early angel investment in my first business when I was 24, and we got absolutely screwed by them. And we escaped that through a pure fluke, because the guy had done it so many times. The receiver he appointed turned around to him and told him he wasn't going to let him do this again. And I remember his words were very deliberately. And if he did do it, he would personally ensure that Companies House struck him off and removed him from all of his directorships. And it turned into this very weird meeting, which resulted in, I was supposed to walk out with 20% of the company between me and my co-founders. We walked out with 100% of the business. But it's because it blew up in his face. But, I didn't know anything. I had no network, nothing. Yeah. Somebody gave us some money. Looked good, sounded good, built the business to nearly 2 million turnover.
And we're passionate about the project, you see, that's it. We're passionate about the business, so that's our focus. We just know that the cash, that's being injected is temporary fuel, but it's just going to get us to where we want. And we believe those that are investing in us are investing in us and the business. Yeah, it's not just investing in the business. That's the key, and into our values that we hold. Yeah. And that there is
unfortunately, it's rarely correct. They are investing in themselves, what it can do for them, unless you spend a lot of time looking for values line investors. I'm very lucky, and I will give them a shout out, that our current investors, Venturian, are completely value aligned, and have been really great this time around. But that's cumulatively a lot of lessons learned between the management team at a much later stage of life. So
well, for anyone who's listening, I am actually going to call Zandra and Alex up, because I have another idea that I need to run past them on a business. You made me brave. What can I say? I am conscious of your time, and we have so much information on this. Before I round up, I always ask my guests, so Zandra and Alex, before I round up and you leave, please provide us with one piece of wisdom you'd like to share with our listeners, and also a book or musician or artist that you would like to recommend.
Okay, so piece of wisdom. It's not a very wise piece of wisdom, because most people have heard it before, but it stands me in good stead. So you don't know what you don't know, and just keeping that in your mind all the time, asking why, and going just that bit further and going beyond what's presented to you is critical, and data is so key to doing that. And so that'd be mine. I'll think about the book whilst Alex is answering.
Or music artists, or artists generally.
God.
Yeah. Alex, your wisdom.
The one thing I keep coming back to is something my chairman used to say to me all the time, which is business is hard, Alex. If it wasn't, everyone would be doing it and there'd be no opportunity. So on your worst days, that's the bit I constantly go back to. You just go, no, this is what I signed up for. Suck it up, work out how to deal with it and move on. And that's where that sort of 90% of success in business is persistence statement comes from. It is true. The highs are great, but not frequent. They can be, unless you're very lucky. And then there's a couple of books. If I keep it to sort of data and software and SaaS and business,
don't have to. It can just be Alice in Wonderland.
Well, I just constantly recommend. There are two which I keep going back to in business. One is the good to great, vision to value stuff, vision definition, and making sure that you use that to know whether the people around you are aligned to the thing you're trying to do as a management team. Constantly go back to that. And if you're working in a sort of software SaaS sort of business, the crossing the chasm sort of approach to product launch, again, is a constant sort of return loop.
Oh, you stole one of mine. I was going to say crossing the chasm. Damn it!
You can say the same
no,
one.
it's fine.
I was only allowed one. You can have.
Oh, well, I've got to say the only book I've been able to contribute to and had the pleasure of contributing to, and if I don't mention it, I'll get shot by Anne Bowden, because Anne Bowden was the chair of the task force, and one of the outputs was the Female Founders Playbook, and it's a really good narrative with lots of stories from female founders about their journey and what they learned, and I think it's a great starting point for anybody thinking about questions they should be asking. Like back to you don't know what you don't know. It's a really good starting point. Read, get yourself prepared for what you're facing into, read it as early as you can, and it'll help you to start thinking about what you don't know and who you need to go and ask really for. So I think that'd be mine. And I was going to say my singer was Tori Amos, because I remember watching her play two pianos at the same time with her hair flying everywhere, and she was just the most phenomenally, inspirationally kind of wild but brilliantly amazing woman, thinking, oh my God, I want to be like you at a very young age. And I think just because she represented this freedom and just capability, and she kicked ass. So yeah, she's mine.
Well, I'm definitely going to take on those books that are recommended in the playbook, and actually, why not reapproach that again with my next business idea that I'm calling you guys on for help.
Excellent. We like that a lot.
So we had an excellent podcast today. Thank you so much, both of you. What we have learned is essentially we have raw data that we are sitting on, and actually we need full visibility of that, and understanding and looking at that data ourselves, asking questions. And if we are not data literate, we can get help in understanding that, but we really need to make our own decisions and not just get a synopsis from people. It sometimes, and it will help us drive better strategic decisions. In terms of artificial intelligence, really, what are we building on, and what biases are we building on? And actually, we need to again look at the data sets that we have in order to not just focus on operation efficiency. And I love what Alex, you said about it's not just greenwashing, it's governance washing. Absolutely key phrase that I'm going to borrow from you.
Such a good steal.
Banking that for later. And yes, Zandra, I love the fact that you are saying that actually we need to look at the data, because it also helps with the social mobility, the regional funding, and just essentially understanding where we sit in the organization is now being data led as well, and that we need to be data enabled with the information. And that is actually critical. And I think from a governance perspective of anybody who's on a board, I think that is so important to understand, that you do need to understand data now. It's not just about digitalization. It's not just like how do we improve operations, but actually let's go back to the basics of what is the company's purpose, what is our values, what information do we have, and do we actually understand we have a lot more information, and maybe we ought to revisit that. And if we don't understand it, let's get outside help to help us understand it. Thank you so much. For all our listeners, you've been listening with our guest, Zandra Moore from Panintelligence, who can be found on LinkedIn, and Alex Craven from Data City, who also can be found on LinkedIn. Thank you very much, both.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. I've been Rashmi Dubé, Litigation and ESG Partner with Gunnar Cook, and you've been listening to the ESG podcast. Contact me at rashmi.dubé@gunnarcook.com, link in with me, or follow me on X and Instagram. On X is @RashmiDubé, and my handle is rashmi.dubé on Instagram. If you would like to understand the path you are taking as a director or the company on how to improve company performance from the practice of good governance and avoid litigation, or at least reduce the risk, drop me a note. Thanks for listening to the ESG podcast with Gunnar Cook. See you next time.